Something happened at the funeral that left everyone with thousands of questions on their minds. As everyone tried to make sense of it, in an instant, an unexpected event unfolded, changing everything in that room. It was a crisp fall morning in New York City when the news of Colonel John Anderson's passing rippled through the local community. At the age of 76, Anderson, a decorated Vietnam War veteran, had peacefully passed away in his sleep. His military honors were well known, a testament to his bravery and service to the country. But to his family, Colonel Anderson was simply Dad, Grandpa, and Great-Grandpa, a constant source of love, wisdom, and strength. He had been a man of principle and discipline, someone who always put his family before anything else, even before his own service to the nation. As they prepared for his funeral, the family's grief was compounded by a growing sense of loss, not just of their loved one, but of a world that seemed to be moving on without him. It was a painful reminder that those who serve so selflessly often fade quietly from the public's memory. But to the Anderson family, his legacy lived on in the memories he had created, the lessons he had taught, and the love he had given. The Anderson family gathered at a small historic church in downtown Manhattan. The pews were filled with friends, colleagues, and veterans who had served alongside Colonel Anderson. The men and women who had stood side by side with him during the Vietnam War came to honor the soldier who had fought beside them. Their expressions told stories of camaraderie, shared sacrifice, and a bond forged in the fires of battle. But there was also a deep sadness in the air. They had all come to say goodbye to a brother in arms. The mood was somber, the air thick with reverence. Conversations were quiet and respectful, with people reminiscing about Anderson's bravery, his kindness, and his dedication to his comrades. The family shared stories of the colonel's legacy, how he had been a devoted husband, father, and grandfather, always leading by example. Despite his many accolades, Anderson never once boasted about his achievements. His humility and quiet strength made him an even greater hero in the eyes of his family. As the mourners took their seats and prepared for the service, the unexpected happened. The church door creaked open, and the room fell into an abrupt silence. The Anderson family looked up in unison. The figure that appeared in the doorway was unmistakable: Donald Trump, the former President of the United States. His towering height, sharp suit, and unmistakable appearance filled the room with a mix of disbelief and confusion. There were no cameras. There was no entourage. There were no speeches or fanfare. It was just Donald Trump walking alone, without any of the usual trappings of politics, into a small church filled with mourning family members and veterans. He wasn't there to make a statement or to rally a crowd. He was there for one reason only: to pay his respects. Trump made his way to the Anderson family's pew, and the room stood still, a collective breath held in awe. The Andersons, though taken aback, were moved by the presence of the former president. He wasn't there as a politician, but simply as a man honoring another man's legacy. Peter Anderson, Colonel Anderson's eldest son, stood closest to the casket, his face a mixture of disbelief and deep sadness. His father's death had shaken him to his core, and the loss of such a powerful figure in his life had left an emotional void. But as he saw Trump approach, a mix of emotions flooded over him: surprise, gratitude, and a deep appreciation for the unanticipated act of respect. The room fell even quieter as Trump stood before the family. "Mr. Trump," Peter began, his voice filled with emotion, "we didn't expect you here. This means more than we can say." Trump's face softened, and for a moment the hard edges that the public often saw seemed to melt away. He placed a hand gently on Peter's shoulder, offering both a comforting and respectful gesture. "I couldn't let a man like your father go without paying my respects," Trump said, his voice carrying a sincerity that felt out of place in the setting. "Colonel Anderson gave so much to this country. He sacrificed everything for this nation, and I will never forget that. It's an honor to be here, to stand with you all today." The room buzzed with quiet whispers, but there was no mistaking the gravity of the moment. The former president, known for his larger-than-life persona, was not here to draw attention to himself, but to pay homage to a man who had served with dignity and honor. There were no cameras following him, no press conferences, just a simple act of respect in a moment of shared loss. Trump didn't rush to leave the family's side. He remained, standing in silent reflection alongside them as they processed the depth of their grief. The family, still in shock, had never expected someone of Trump's stature to show such vulnerability and compassion. And yet, there he was, simply standing in solidarity with them. The sense of reverence that hung in the air was almost tangible, as if the entire church was holding its breath, respecting both the fallen soldier and the family's journey through grief. After several long minutes, the Andersons extended an invitation to Trump to join them in a private room at the back of the church. It was not a request they had anticipated making, but it felt right. In the quiet of the back room, they would have a moment of connection away from the public gaze. Once inside, Trump closed the door behind him, and the family gathered around him. The room was dimly lit, and the hum of voices in the main hall faded into the background. For the first time, the Andersons were able to speak to Trump not as a politician, but as someone who understood grief, loss, and the heavy weight of sacrifice. "Mr. Trump," Peter said, his voice still shaking, "we don't know how to thank you for this. You didn't have to be here, but you've given us something we'll never forget." Trump's expression softened even more, and he lowered his gaze for a moment. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, one that those who had followed his public life hadn't often seen. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, more reflective. "I understand loss," Trump said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "I know what it's like to lose someone close to you, someone who made a difference in the lives of others. And Colonel Anderson, from everything I've heard, was that kind of person. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a man of character, and that's what matters." Peter wiped his eyes, a mix of emotions swirling within him. The other family members stood nearby, all struck by the gravity of the moment. For a few minutes there were no words spoken, just a shared understanding of the bond that had formed in that room, a bond of mutual respect, shared grief, and human connection. "I didn't know your father personally," Trump continued, his voice steady now, "but I know what it takes to serve. I know the kind of sacrifices people make when they fight for something greater than themselves, and that's what Colonel Anderson did. He gave everything." The room was filled with an almost sacred silence as the Andersons absorbed Trump's words. Peter's voice cracked as he spoke again. "Thank you, Mr. Trump. You've given us something that we never could have expected. You've allowed us to breathe, to pause for a moment and remember my father, not just as a soldier, but as a man." Trump nodded, his expression resolute but kind. "You don't need to thank me. Just remember him. Remember who he was. Honor his memory." As the conversation continued, Trump shared more personal stories, tales of his own family's history of military service. His brother had served in the Air Force, His uncles had fought in World War II. There was no political agenda, no speeches about policy, just a human connection formed in the midst of shared loss. The Anderson family listened intently, the sadness in their hearts tempered by the warmth of understanding. For a few brief moments, the pain they felt seemed to be shared, not just by them, but by the man standing in front of them. When the time came for the service to begin, Trump stood up, adjusting his suit. His tone returned to its familiar firmness, but there was still a note of reverence in it. "I have to leave now," Trump said, his voice firm yet softened by the gravity of the day. "But know this, I won't forget your father. I won't forget his service, and I'll make sure that people remember the heroes who fight for this country." With that, Trump left the room quietly, his departure as understated as his entrance. The Andersons stood in silence for a moment, taking in the weight of what had just occurred. In their grief, they had been offered something unexpected, a gesture of respect, of shared humanity, that would stay with them forever. As they walked back into the main hall to continue the service, Peter turned to his family, his voice filled with quiet reverence. As the family tried to process the unexpected gesture, no one could have predicted the impact it would have on them that day, a moment of profound respect that would stay with them forever.